Trapped in another country, geographic exclaves. While European enclaves like Barl showcase peaceful coexistence within divided communities, Point Roberts, Washington presents a far more vulnerable geographic reality. This tiny American community of about 1,000 people occupies just 4.8 square miles at the southern tip of a Canadian peninsula, completely cut off from the rest of the United States. Unlike European border oddities that emerged from centuries of political negotiation, Point Roberts exists because of a simple cartographic decision, the 49th parallel. When American and British negotiators established the boundary between the United States and British North America in 1846, they agreed on the 49th parallel as a clean, straight dividing line across the continent. This mathematical approach to border drawing, prioritizing a ruler straight line over the natural curve of the coastline, created an unexpected consequence. The Tawasan Peninsula extends south from British Columbia, dipping below the 49th parallel before connecting to the mainland. By strictly following the parallel rather than geographical features, negotiators inadvertently created an American exclave, a piece of American territory physically separated from the mainland and only accessible by traveling through Canada. For decades, this geographic anomaly posed minimal problems. Point Roberts developed as a sleepy community with a unique character, technically American, but deeply connected to Canadian commerce and infrastructure. Its isolation even became an asset, hosting participants in the U.S. Federal Witness Protection Program and Americans seeking privacy away from the mainland. The community developed a hybrid identity, with residents comfortable navigating both American and Canadian systems. But when COVID-19 hit in March 2020, this delicate arrangement collapsed. As both countries closed their borders to non-essential travel, Point Roberts residents found themselves truly trapped. The community experienced an existential crisis. The U.S.-Canada border closure meant residents couldn't drive through Canada to reach the mainland United States, nor could Canadians cross into Point Roberts for shopping and services that had sustained the local economy. "I've lived here for 30 years, said one elderly resident, and suddenly I couldn't even visit my doctor in Bellingham or see my grandchildren on the mainland. We were forgotten, Americans trapped outside America." The pandemic exposed the fragility of life in geographic exclaves. The only grocery store in Point Roberts, the International Marketplace, struggled to remain viable as owner Ollie Hayden reduced operating hours when customer traffic plummeted. With Canadian shoppers, who had comprised roughly 75% of the store's business, unable to cross the border, the community's food security hung by a thread. Education systems also unraveled. Children in Point Roberts typically crossed the international border twice daily to attend school in Blaine, Washington, as the exclave is too small to support its own school district beyond elementary grades. Remote learning became the only option, further isolating younger residents from their peers and educational resources. Some Point Roberts residents, particularly its higher-than-average percentage of retirees, appreciated the quieter pace of life during the pandemic, highlighting the community's divergent interests and needs. The economic impact extended throughout the community. Local businesses dependent on Canadian customers shut down entirely as border restrictions continued, while emergency services had special cross-border arrangements, allowing American ambulances to transport patients through Canadian territory to reach American hospitals. Routine healthcare became problematic. Even with certain medical exemptions for border crossing, documentation requirements created barriers for accessing care. Point Roberts isn't alone in this predicament. Similar geographic anomalies exist worldwide, each with unique challenges. Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave of nearly 1 million people, sits entirely separated from Russia between Poland and Lithuania, creating a situation where Russian citizens must cross international borders just to travel between parts of their own country. Spain's Livia exists as a 5-square-mile Spanish municipality completely surrounded by France. The German town of Bussingen am Hockerheim functions as a German exclave inside Switzerland, using Swiss francs alongside euros and navigating dual systems for everything from healthcare to telecommunications. These geographical oddities highlight a fundamental truth about international borders. They're human constructs often ill-suited to geographic realities and community needs. When borders follow straight lines or mathematical coordinates rather than mountains, rivers, or cultural boundaries, they create dysfunctional spaces where daily life requires constant navigation of international systems. What makes nations maintain these impractical arrangements despite their obvious complications? The answer lies in the international system's strong preference for border stability. Once established, borders gain a powerful inertia. Changing them requires complex negotiations and raises fears of setting precedents for other territorial disputes. Even when both sides recognize the impracticality of a particular border arrangement, the diplomatic and legal hurdles to modification often outweigh the benefits. For residents of these geographic islands, survival depends on special international agreements. Point Roberts relies on provisions allowing residents to transit through Canada without stopping, while Kaliningrad has negotiated specific transit corridors through Lithuania. These arrangements remain vulnerable to political tensions between the surrounding and parent countries, a reality made painfully clear during the pandemic. The economic viability of these communities depends almost entirely on their relationships with surrounding territories. When those relationships are disrupted, as during border closures, the community's economic foundation crumbles. Perhaps most poignantly, these geographic anomalies create communities with split identities. Residents simultaneously belong to their parent nation while being practically dependent on the surrounding country. They often develop cultural affinities with both nations, speaking multiple languages and navigating different legal systems with a fluency most citizens never develop. This dual identity becomes part of the community's character, with residents developing a unique perspective on nationality and belonging. The pandemic forced exclaves to confront existential questions about their future viability. As supply chains were disrupted and normal movement patterns halted, communities like Point Roberts had to reckon with whether their unusual geographic situation remained sustainable in a world where borders might close with little warning. The challenges faced by exclaves offer important insights about citizenship, community resilience, and the artificiality of international boundaries. While many borders worldwide follow natural features or cultural divisions, these geographic anomalies reveal how arbitrary lines on maps can create real no man's land, the UN buffer zone in Cyprus. While artificial borders create challenges for residents of exclaves, a far more unsettling reality exists when a border becomes so contested that nobody can claim the space between. In Cyprus, this manifests as a 112-mile scar cutting across the island, a United Nations buffer zone where time has literally frozen since 1974, creating neighborhoods, businesses, and even an international airport trapped in a diplomatic void that officially doesn't exist on any map. Known locally as the Green Line, this demilitarized zone was established after Turkish forces invaded northern Cyprus following a Greek-backed coup. What began as a temporary measure in 1974 has persisted for 50 years, becoming one of the longest-running UN peacekeeping missions in history. The buffer zone varies dramatically, from just a few meters wide in Nicosia's urban center to several kilometers in rural areas, encompassing about 3% of Cyprus's total land area, roughly equivalent to the size of Manhattan. I was 7 when we fled, recalls Marina Christou, whose family home stands just inside the buffer zone in Nicosia. My mother told me to pack one bag for the weekend. That weekend has lasted my entire life. I can see our family home from my apartment window, but I cannot touch the doorknob or sit under the lemon tree my grandfather planted. Walking through the buffer zone today is like entering a time capsule. Former homes stand exactly as they were abandoned, with personal possessions still visible through windows, dishes on tables, clothes in closets, photos on walls. Shops display products with 1970s packaging and pricing. Streets designed for bustling commerce now host only UN patrols and wildlife that has reclaimed the territory in the absence of human activity. The buffer zone contains Nicosia International Airport, once Cyprus's primary aviation hub, now a ghostly monument to the conflict. Passenger aircraft remain on the tarmac, trapped in perpetual delay since the day the fighting began. The terminal building, once a symbol of the island's tourism economy, stands abandoned with decades-old departure schedules still displayed, announcing flights that never took off. For the United Nations peacekeeping force in Cyprus, UNFICYP, monitoring this no-man's land is a constant challenge. Using an array of vehicles, foot patrols, bicycles, and helicopters, peacekeepers maintain continuous surveillance throughout the buffer zone. A highly mobile unit stands ready to respond to emergencies, providing security in an area that experiences approximately 1,000 incidents annually, ranging from verbal altercations to unauthorized firearm use. The buffer zone isn't entirely uninhabited. Several villages exist within this diplomatic gray area, creating complex jurisdictional puzzles for residents. Farmers require UN permission and often military escorts to access their fields. Construction projects face unique hurdles as UNFICYP must consider security implications, property ownership, and operational requirements before approving any development. One such village is Pylos/Pyle, a rare bicommunal settlement where Greek and Turkish Cypriots live side by side. In August 2023, tensions flared when Turkish Cypriot construction personnel clashed with UN peacekeepers on the plateau above the village. Though Special Representative Colin Stewart announced in October 2023 that an understanding had been reached between the two sides to resolve the situation, implementation has been suspended for over a year. The human impact of this division extends far beyond practical inconveniences. Families separated by the buffer zone have spent decades unable to return to ancestral homes. Properties remain legally owned by displaced persons who cannot access them. Businesses built over generations stand abandoned, their owners watching from a distance as time and nature gradually reclaim them. Perhaps the most striking example is Varosha, once a glamorous beach resort frequented by celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. When Turkish forces advanced in 1974, its 39,000 residents fled, expecting to return within days. Instead, the area was fenced off, and for decades, entry was forbidden to everyone except Turkish military personnel. The result is a surreal urban landscape where high-rise hotels stand empty, department stores showcase 1970s fashions, and luxury cars gather dust in underground garages, a Mediterranean Pompeii frozen by political deadlock. The ecological consequences of this unusual situation have been unexpectedly positive. With limited human interference, the buffer zone has become a sanctuary for wildlife. Endemic plant species flourish, and rare animals thrive in this accidental nature reserve. Researchers have documented biodiversity hotspots within the zone, including species that have become endangered elsewhere on the island. For those living alongside the green line, psychological impacts accumulate over generations. Children grow up with visible reminders of conflict directly outside their windows. Grandparents tell stories of homes and businesses they once owned just meters away but cannot visit. The constant presence of military checkpoints, guard towers, and warning signs creates a persistent awareness of division. Despite these challenges, recent diplomatic developments offer cautious hope. In October 2023, Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot leaders agreed to convene another informal meeting under UN auspices. They also discussed potentially opening new crossings along the ceasefire lines, which could facilitate greater interaction between communities. The humanitarian dimension of the buffer zone continues to evolve. In September 2024, Greek Cypriot authorities began accepting asylum seekers from countries including Somalia and Syria who had been stranded in the buffer zone. By November, this situation was resolved, demonstrating that cooperation remains possible despite broader political tensions. For residents navigating daily life near the buffer zone, a complex system of permits and checkpoints governs movement. Those living within villages inside the buffer zone must register with UNFICYP. Farmers seeking to tend lands within the zone require specific authorizations. Construction or renovation projects face additional scrutiny. Yet amid these restrictions, communities have developed remarkable adaptations. Some villages have established bicommunal initiatives that bring Greek and Turkish Cypriots together despite official division. Environmental projects, cultural exchanges, and business partnerships operate across the buffer zone, creating connections that official politics has failed to achieve. The ceasefire lines remain heavily militarized, with both sides maintaining surveillance equipment and conducting operations that sometimes disregard the UN's authority. In January 2024, the UN Security Council extended UNFICYP's mandate until January 31, 2026, affirming the continued importance of this mission nearly 5 decades after its creation. For outsiders, the Cyprus buffer zone may seem like a historical curiosity, a Cold War relic persisting into the 21st century. For Cypriots, however, it represents a daily reality that shapes everything from practical travel arrangements to deeper questions of identity and belonging. The paradox of living beside a place that officially doesn't exist creates unique psychological and practical challenges unknown in more conventional border regions.